our guest speaker. Anthony Reed is a business professional with over 40 years in project management and executive positions. His area of expertise has been analyzing and implementing business applications. He's led multi-million-dollar international projects and departments for Fortune 500 and international companies. He's a rare endurance athlete and was inducted into the National Distance Running Hall of Fame. He's currently the CEO of Caribbean Endurance Sports Corporation and executive director and co-founder of the National Black Marathoners Association. And one fun fact about Mr. Reed is that he was chased by fur seals during the race.
Thank you. It's great to be back here. And before I forget, so I was here on Monday night for the dinner. Who sat at the table? Okay, so we have copies of the autobiography I was telling you about for those that were sitting at the table that I was at. So when this is over, be sure to come up and get your copy of the book. Okay, so we're going to talk about going places. I had started a new business, and a friend of mine recommended that I talk with a friend of his who happened to be vice president of branding for Mary Kay Cosmetics. Part of this business involved doing speaking engagements. So it just so happened I had a business meeting there at the Mary Kay building here in Dallas. I sent an email to the lady, and she agreed to set aside 30 minutes of a very valuable time to talk with me. So I walked up to her office. She extended her hand for me to shake, and I extended mine, and she said, "I would never ever hire you to talk to my staff. You're a geek, you're a nerd, you're dull, you're boring, you can't hold anyone's attention, you're a CPA, and you work in IT. You've got to be dull and boring." My mouth hit the floor. And then she said, "Bob said you're the type of person who could take constructive criticism, and I wanted you to know what I thought about you before you even opened your mouth. Now come on in and let's sit down and talk." So what was she talking about? She was talking about perceptions. She was saying that before you even open your mouth, people are already judging you. And the thing that you have to decide is whether or not you want to live in this box that people put you in. So all of you are being judged all the time. So he kind of talked about my business background. I'll go into it into a little bit more detail to show you the impact of perceptions. So I have 2 undergraduate degrees, a degree in mathematics as well as a degree in business. Started working in corporate America and was working as an individual contributor. I decided I wanted to move into management because that's where you truly have all of the control. That's when you can control budgets, you're hiring people, you're firing people, you're doing performance reviews. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go after basically the power positions. So I went back to college part-time in the evening, got an MBA, got promoted into management. Then I wanted to make the jump from being a manager to being an executive. This is where all the big bucks are. But I realized I had to deal with perceptions as an African American. It's perceived we are not good writers. It's difficult for us to speak to anyone, to have, to give presentations, to sell things. It's also perceived that we really don't understand the business processes. We may actually be in a position where we're training people how to do things, but still the perception is we don't know. And also we can't manage money. We can't manage budgets. These are all the things that people will perceive about you before you even open your mouth. And you could even have these things written down on your resume, but it's hard to prove. So in order for me to make the leap from manager to business executive, I have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. Not only could I do those things, but I could do them well enough to teach other people. So I ended up writing articles. I've written over 50 articles, and I have 6 books that are published. That snatched away the excuse about I can't write. I ended up getting speaking engagements. all around the world. USA, Canada, Brazil, Europe, snatched away that excuse that we're not able to speak. In order to prove to them that I understood technology, accounting, and management, I became an adjunct professor and taught those very classes. In other words, if I was perceived to have a weakness in a certain area, I taught that college class just to prove to them that I actually know what I'm doing. Then, in order to prove to them that I can manage budgets, I returned back to college 10 years after I got my MBA, got a master's in accounting, and passed the CPA exam. Once I did all these things, I made the transition from being just a manager to being an executive. So, one of the questions that you will have to ask yourself is, do you want to live in a box that other people put you in? So, my background. Born and raised in St. Louis and lived in the Blue Mire Projects. So it's obvious my life was not easy. I was not destined to become a business executive by most people's standards. When I was about 7 years old, I was faced with 3 major life-changing events that all took place. First of all, believe it or not, I have a major stuttering problem. When I was that young, I was going to speech 2 or 3 times a week while I was in elementary school. How many of you know someone that has diabetes? Okay. I was diagnosed as being pre-diabetic. So I was gonna have to live with that for the rest of my life. Every day I was concerned about, was I gonna have to start taking insulin injections? Another thing I did back then, which was kind of interesting, my mother got my brother and I interested in collecting postage stamps from all around the world. So I want you to imagine 2 little kids living in the St. Louis inner city collecting stamps from all over the world. Now that was a very interesting time, by the way, to be collecting postage stamps, because African countries were gaining their independence. And every time an African country or any country gained its independence, it changed 4 things: its name, its currency, its flag, and its postage stamps. So imagine, I was 8 years old, and I could name more countries around the world than most kids could name US states. But all of that ended up laying the groundwork for everything else that was gonna happen in the rest of my life. When I was in college, I read a book by Dr. Kenneth Cooper, who happens to be based here in Dallas. And in his book, there was one paragraph that stated diabetics who are dependent on insulin could either decrease their insulin intake or go completely off of it if they maintained a fitness program. So in 1976, I set these different lifetime goals for myself. And the one that's pretty interesting is a lifetime goal of averaging 3 miles a day of running, walking, or crawling. In 1982, by then I moved down here to the Dallas area, and I decided that I wanted to run a marathon. Does anyone know how long a marathon is? 26 miles, 385 yards. That's like running from the Dallas City Hall to Fort Worth City Hall. If you run track, to put it in perspective, it's running 105 laps around a quarter-mile track. So I'm at the starting line, my very first marathon in 1982. There were about 400 people in the race, and there were only about 4 or 5 blacks. So I'm standing there at the starting line area, and these white guys around me start talking about me. They didn't know anything about me. They're saying, "You're too big to run marathons. You should go back down and run sprints." So while they're doing all this talking, I fall back on Black history. So I happen to do a lot of reading, and I read Dick Gregory's autobiography. And very few people realize that although Dick Gregory was a social activist, he was also a star cross-country runner and track runner in St. Louis. And in fact, in 1976, Dick Gregory ran from LA to New York City. He averaged 41 miles a day. So while these guys are standing around telling me that I'm too big to run a marathon and maybe I need to pick up another sport, I'm sitting up here thinking, if this brother Dick Gregory can run 41 miles in a day, what's 26.2 miles? And I went ahead and finished the race. And if I had listened to those guys, these walls in my office would not have anything hanging on them. So again, they wanted to put me in a box. I stepped outside their box. So even though I'm a business person, I'm also an endurance athlete. I'm a marathoner. I've won age group and weight division trophies. I weigh over 200 pounds. I have a best time for a marathon of 3 hours and 36 minutes. To put it in perspective, I also have a best time for running 20 miles in 2 hours and 35 minutes. I use my business skills to organize the National Black Marathoners Association, which is the country's largest organization of black distance runners. We have over 16,000 members. Now, I've also been on the board of directors of different running-related businesses, as well as being on the board of directors of technology companies. So since I ran the first marathon in 1982, I had several goals. One, I was a sole supporter for a family of 4. I couldn't justify just kind of going around the country to run, so I set a goal of running 50 marathons in one state. So I ran 50 marathons in Texas. In 2007, at 52 years old, I finished running marathons on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. In 2009, I finished running my 100th 26.2-mile marathon. And in 2013, I finished running marathons in all 50 states. Now with those last 3 goals, 7 continents, 50 states, and 100 marathons, that's doing what's called the marathon hat trick. And there are fewer than 50 people in the world that have accomplished that goal. Now in 2007, when I finished running marathons on all 7 continents, I ended up making world history. I'm the first black in the world to ever run marathons on all 7 continents. And that happened on June 23rd, 2007. So next week will be my 15-year anniversary. Now, ironically, thank you. Now, ironically, because of my running accomplishments, I was inducted into the National Distance Running Hall of Fame this year. So again, thinking about those guys standing around me in 1982, telling me I picked the wrong sport. I've kept a handwritten running journal since 1979. I've logged over 48,000 miles as of today. And notice my average miles per day is 3.04 miles. That's a goal that I had set for myself back in 1976. I'll be 67 next month, and I'm still not on insulin. Right. So think about that. So all the money that I would have spent on insulin, high blood pressure medicine, medicine for hypertension, I used it to travel all around the world. So, you're young, start early. Walking, running, set your goal, but stick with it. So again, this is all about being in a box. You don't want to be in a box someone else puts you in. You want to be in your own box. So with all of my adventures, traveling all around the world, traveling all throughout this country, I've met a lot of very interesting people. And I would talk to them to find out, so what makes you successful? Some people are just successful in sports, some people are just successful in business, but I was looking for people that were successful in multiple areas. And from talking with them, I developed what's called the achievement equation. This is something that was a commonality with all of them. And by the way, I don't know where the box is. You'll all be getting a copy of the book called The Achievement Equation, by the way, that I wrote. So it's a really good thing. It really gets into the detail about this process. So the achievement equation is a mathematical equation. Like I said, one of my degrees happens to be in math, so I have to put everything in terms of an equation. And it's a multiplicative equation. You have goal setting, motivation, planning, and execution. Now imagine each one of these components is binary. A binary number is either what? 1 or it's 0, right? Any number multiplied times 0 is what? 0. So, we can just set that down. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So any number multiplied times 0 is 0. So let's take a look at this equation. If you don't know how to set a goal, you'll achieve nothing. If you know how to set a goal, but you're not motivated to reach that goal, for example, you may decide that you have a goal of going to college, but if you don't wake yourself up to go to the classes, again, you're not motivated, you achieve absolutely nothing. Now, you can set a good goal, you can be highly motivated, but if you don't make a plan on how to reach that goal, you achieve nothing. And looking at the fourth component, you can do really good at the first 3 components, but if you can't execute that plan, you achieve nothing. So this is something that was very common with all the different people that I ended up meeting and talking to. So we're going to look at these in a little bit more detail. Goal setting. In the business world, they talk about setting something that's called a SMART goal. And SMART is an acronym for a lot of different things, a goal that is simple or specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Now, that last one, timely, is critical. Because you'll find people that will set goals, but they never give themselves a time frame for when they want to achieve that particular goal. Several of us, one day were talking about the most defining moments in our life. You know, that time, that situation where you can look back on and you can say, you know, if I was able to manage that, I can manage anything. And for the most of us, as we were talking, we realized the most defining moment came during our sophomore or junior year in college. That's when you would go back home, you would hang out with your friends who didn't go to college, you're talking to them, and their life looks really, really good. You know, they're living in a 1-bedroom apartment, you're living in a dorm room with a roommate that has body odor. They're driving a fancy car around, it may be a beat up Volkswagen Jetta or something, you're riding your 10-speed bike to class. They're eating out at fancy restaurants like Red Lobster, and you're eating ramen noodle soup every day. Their life looks really good. One guy spent the summer at a fish processing plant in Alaska, gutting and cleaning fish all day. The money was great, but he knew there was more to life than that, so he got back to college. Another friend of mine spent his summer down in Galveston scraping stuff off the sides of ships so that they could be painted. Got paid really good money, but he knew there was more to life than that. He got back into college. My defining moment came at Washington University when I got kicked out of college. I had 2 undergraduate degrees, a graduate degree. My graduate degree in accounting, by the way, I was on the Accounting Honor Society, but as an undergrad, I got kicked out of college. What happened? Simple. I like to party. So when I got kicked out, I went through different cycles. I happened to have had lunch with a gentleman named Mark Samuel, who co-authored a book called The Power of Personal Accountability. And as Mark and I were talking, and I was saying, yeah, you know, when I got kicked out, you know, I was blaming everyone for why I got kicked out. And the way Mark says that anytime there's a situation that comes up, you can choose to either be accountable or you can choose to be a victim. When I got kicked out, I went through the victim. I would get my papers from my professors, stick them in my folder, wouldn't even look at them. I knew the grades were bad. I was in a state of denial about how bad my situation really was. For some reason, I thought that, you know, the heavens were going to open up, a light was going to come down, and suddenly an A was going to appear in the professor's grade book. I was able to rationalize why I was failing. I was failing because I was just a poor black kid from the ghetto. I resisted change. I kept doing the same thing over and over again, and I was getting the same results, which was I was failing. And I used to hide in the student union, playing cards and going to parties and doing everything else. Now, Mark said something pretty interesting. All of us go through the victim loop at some point in time. The question becomes, how long do you stay a victim? And I want you to think, you may have friends and you know people who have been victims their entire lives. They'll always give you an excuse about why they weren't able to succeed in a particular area. He says you can choose to go through the accountability loop. And this is what I did, again, after I got kicked out. I went through the victim loop for a period of time. Then I happened to have been working on a job where I saw paychecks being printed out. I saw people who had degrees make more money and didn't work as hard as I did. So I got myself back into school. But when I went back in, I had to recognize when I got kicked out, it was my fault. In fact, I got a copy of my transcript. And when I looked on my transcript, there was no place in the world to write excuses. They didn't care. So I owned up to my part in it. Went through that period of self-examination, looking at every single thing that I had done to get kicked out of school. Went through lessons learned, and I took action. And yes, I not only ended up with 1 undergraduate degree, but 2 undergraduate degrees. Now, I almost forgot. One of the big differences I made when I was a victim versus when I was accountable. When I started going to college, I had a goal of going to college. That was my goal. I didn't have a goal of graduating from college by a specific date. When I was a victim, again, it was just about going to college. It was about going to class. Once I started being accountable, I gave myself a deadline by when I wanted to graduate from college. Once I gave myself a deadline, that forced me to not only take classes, but to pass the classes. Different terminology based off of setting a SMART goal. That's why that one part, the most important one to me, is timing. You don't want to go to college. Your goal is to graduate from college by a certain date. I was in a little town called Ushuaia, Argentina, at the very tip of Argentina. I'm standing there on the pier and I heard someone call my name. It was this lady, Elizabeth, from my high school in St. Louis, Missouri. What are the odds of finding someone from your high school in a little town called Ushuaia, Argentina? She introduces me to this gentleman next to her. His name is Dave Hahn. Now, Dave Hahn isn't a household name unless you happen to climb Mount Everest. Dave Hahn has summited Mount Everest more times than anyone other than the people who work on Mount Everest. He's reached the peak of Mount Everest 13 times. Now, he's also known for rescuing people on Mount Everest. Interesting fact, 80% of the people who die on Mount Everest die on their way back down. They don't die going up. These individuals are so focused on making it to the top, they forget they need oxygen to come back down. So your number one goal isn't necessarily to make it to the top. Your number one goal is to live to tell the story about it. And by the way, there's an interesting stat associated with professional athletes. Professional baseball players, professional basketball players, and professional football players are more likely to be bankrupt. 80% of them are more likely to be bankrupt within 5 years after they stop playing. Again, all they think about is making it to the top. They're not thinking about the complete cycle of not only becoming a professional athlete, but what happens to them after they retire. Let's talk briefly about motivation. Real simple and yet very powerful tool to use. Take a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle of it. On the left-hand side, you don't have to do that right now. But on the left-hand side, a person would write down what bad things will happen to them if they don't change or if they don't reach a particular goal. On the other side, they would write down what good things would happen if they go ahead and reach that particular goal. Now, this is something that works with just about any goal that you can imagine. So, for example, when I got kicked out of school and I went through this process of what bad things would happen if I don't graduate. I won't make a lot of money, I have a shorter life expectancy, I won't get a chance to travel around the world. These are all the things that would happen to me if I didn't reach that goal. What good things would happen if I did graduate? I'll have more money, I'll have a better lifestyle, I'll be able to travel the world, I'll be able to finance all the other different goals that I have. Now, when I did this for fitness, for again, averaging 3 miles a day, on this side, I wrote down what bad things will happen if I don't average 3 miles a day. I wrote one word, that was Bill. Bill was a guy that I worked with while I was in high school. And over about a 6-year period, Bill lost his eye due to glaucoma. He had his toes amputated, his leg amputated, and ultimately he lost his life, all due to complications associated with diabetes. So every time I think about not running or not working out, I always think about Bill. Bill, I don't think Bill was even 50 years old when he died. What good things will happen if I, again, keep my 3 miles a day average? I'll be able to see the world. Once you start achieving goals, you'll meet very interesting people, by the way, along the way. I was at a conference in Buenos Aires. It was, you could sit anywhere you wanted to during the dinner. And I sat next to this blonde-haired lady named Jenny. Jenny and I started talking about our goals and aspirations. And Jenny said she had a goal of running a marathon on all 7 continents. Now, to put this in perspective, there are only 250 people in the world who have run marathons on all 7 continents. The odds of meeting someone else who has the same goal is pretty rare. She also has this another interesting goal. She wanted to climb the highest mountain on all 7 continents. Odds of finding someone who has climbed Mount Everest is also pretty rare. But here I am at a banquet in Buenos Aires talking to Jenny about our 2 types of goals. So Jenny had tried to reach the summit of Mount Everest twice. She would climb up to a certain altitude, she would get injured, start having medical issues, come back down the mountain, get the medical issues taken care of, go back up there a couple of years later, get to an even higher altitude, get sick, have to come back down. So she was going through the self-analysis, finding out what's wrong, fixing it, and going back to trying to reach the top. So I didn't see Jenny again after this dinner until Jenny was featured in Runner's World for being the first woman in the world to run marathons on all 7 continents and climb the highest mountain on all 7 continents. I was also featured in Runner's World for being the first Black to run marathons on all 7 continents. Now, once you start setting goals, you'll start finding other people entering into your life that can help. But the big thing about motivation is you have to feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's about the only way you're really going to expand your comfort zone. In order to expand my comfort zone, I have this acronym called FEARS, stands for Failure to Evaluate All Realistic Solutions. So whenever I find myself in a difficult situation, I try to come up with as many different possible solutions as I can. When I sat for the CPA exam, at least when I was preparing for the CPA exam, I was in the Accounting Honor Society, and one of my professors told me that I should be able to pass the exam without taking one of the in-class prep courses. So I went ahead, I got to software, I took a practice exam, I scored about 20%. I studied really, really hard, took another practice exam, scored 20% again. What I began to realize was 2 things. Number one, 100% of what I knew represented 20% of the exam. But I also studied myself, and I realized every time I would go back to study, I studied the things I already knew. I felt like an idiot stepping outside of my comfort zone and trying to understand consolidations and eliminations, and corporate taxes, and all these other things. And anytime I would try to study something I didn't know, I went right back to the stuff I already knew, because that's where I felt comfortable. And I knew the only way I was gonna be able to pass that exam was to let everything I knew go and just live in the uncomfortableness of all these other things that I didn't know. It was tough, but in doing so, I was able to expand my comfort zone and pass the CPA exam. Now, using another example of this, I told you my brother and I collected postage stamps when we lived in the inner city. My brother went on to live overseas for 18 years. He lived, I think, in Europe for about a year, and then he lived 17 years in Africa. My brother learned to speak Arabic, French, Portuguese, and Swahili, all fluently. And I asked him, how did you do it? He said, simple. I would go to a country, and I would say, I'm not gonna speak a word of English for anything. So if he wanted a glass of water, he had to listen to other people to figure out how to ask for a glass of water. He let go of what he was very familiar with and lived in the uncomfortableness of having to learn something he didn't know. So you have to be motivated to move outside and live in that uncomfortableness. So I set an interesting goal for myself several years ago was I wanted to get to the point where I could swim 1,500 yards. And that's 60 lengths of most pools. I got to the point where I could do it, but I wanted to do it faster. I realized that I would swim a length of the pool, hold on to the end of the wall, catch my breath, swim another length, get to the end of the pool, catch my breath. But I wanted to get faster. And I realized the only way I could get faster was to learn how to do a flip turn. I didn't know how to do a flip turn. And in fact, I had to list all of my fears associated with doing a flip turn. Holding my breath longer. I'm swimming, I have a pretty good rhythm, I know I'm gonna be breathing, very periodically, but when I hit that wall, I had to do that flip turn. My breathing rhythm was messed up. I had to hold my breath for a longer period of time. The thing that really freaked me out was being upside down underwater. When I was in middle school, we had to take tumbling. I realized I could not be a gymnast because I had this habit of closing my eyes when I should be keeping my eyes open to spot the ground. And the last and most interesting challenge was swimming close enough to the wall so you can push off. If you swam too close to the wall and you did your flip, your heels are gonna hit the top of the pool. If you try and you're not close enough to the wall, you can do your flip and you don't have anything to push off with, and you just sink down to the bottom. So, in addressing my fears, I outlined everything, all the challenges that I had, addressed them, and believe it or not, in 2 days, I learned how to do a flip turn. So again, it's about identifying your weaknesses and addressing them. In running marathons, there's something called hitting the wall. The wall is usually around 20 miles in a marathon. It's challenging. By the way, I'm also a distance running coach. It's challenging for people who are trying to run a marathon for the first time. It's the most difficult part. It is purely a mental thing. People can get up, they can run maybe 10 miles, 12 miles, but at 20 miles, what happens is your body basically runs out of glycogen, or you can say sugar. The average person consumes about 2,500 calories a day. When you figure out the average number of calories a person burns per mile, they run out of the calories at around 20 miles. So one of the things that I have to coach distance runners to understand is the halfway point of a marathon is not 13.1 miles, but it's actually 20 miles. For miles 0 through 20, it is 80% physical and 20% mental. Once your body runs out of glycogen, once it runs out of sugar, it flips, it becomes 80% mental and 20% physical. So what happens is your body is saying, I just want to stop. I just want to sit down and rest and relax. And your mind is screaming and yelling at your body to keep moving, keep pushing through it. So one of the things, again, is about training people how to deal with this on a mental level. And the thing that I use with the individuals that I coach is use M&Ms to kill ants. M&Ms, to me, stands for mantra and music. Like I said, I got kicked out of school for partying. It's because I love music. ANTS is an acronym for automatic negative thoughts. Those are those things that pop into your head whenever you want to do something. You hear that voice telling you why you can't do it. It could be the voice of your best friend telling you, I don't get that deal about college. You're going to get it in a day. Always giving you excuses for why you're not going to be able to reach your goal. It could be a parent. It could be a sibling. Think about all the things that you've wanted to achieve, and someone told you you couldn't do it. And every time you think about reaching that goal or following that particular path, that voice always comes in your head. You kill it with M&Ms. Every time something bad happens or every time I'm in a situation, I always fall back on my mantra. Hills build character. I was in a 20-mile race. We had 52 hills during the race. And someone had this spray painted on the street. Hills build character. I look at every single challenge as a character builder. I don't run away from it. I tell myself, you know what? If I finish this, I'm going to be a stronger person. If you ask most endurance runners what their mantra is, they can just rattle it right off. Just do it. Pain is temporary, finishing is forever. I love the last one. Pain is only a perception. If the going gets tough, you adjust your perception. Some people use biblical verses. So, have a mantra. Have that thing you can always fall back on. And whenever that little voice comes in your head, kill it with an M&M. For music, for every race that I run, I have songs associated with it. I don't listen to music while I run because I want to be conscious of my environment. And besides, they may not have the right song playing at the right time. So for example, when it's raining, I'm more likely to be thinking about Psycho Alpha Disco Beta Bio Aqua Duty. The short name of it is Aqua Boogie by Parliament Funkadelic. And he has lyrics in there where he talks about dancing underwater without getting wet. I ran a Hartford Marathon. We had 5.5 inches of rain during the race. And all I was doing was singing Aqua Boogie and visualize the raindrops were parting. I was perfectly dry throughout the race. I went running today, and I always fall back on my favorite song when running in the Texas heat. It's getting hot in here. So always have a song to keep you motivated through those tough times. Now we're going to talk briefly about planning. And working with people, be it on training for a marathon or a multi-million-dollar project, or even going to school, have a plan. Know exactly what you need to do in order to make it. And I'm going to give you some interesting advice. Don't necessarily rely on your college advisor. You're old enough to read. You should read the catalog. You should know every single thing you need to do to graduate. Because it could be your advisor may not actually be looking out for your best interests. In my senior year in college, I was talking with my college advisor. I was about to graduate, and I told her, I said, hey, I want to go to graduate school. She looked at me and she said, you're not graduate school material. I don't think you'll ever get in any graduate school in the country. But what she didn't know was I had a plan. I had read the catalogs about what it would take to get into graduate schools. I screwed up my first 2 years. That was painfully obvious. But I also knew grad schools would either look at your overall grade point average for all 4 years, or they would look at your grade point average for your last 2 years in college. So I ended up my last 2 years in the toughest courses getting like a 3.8 grade point average. I got into SMU's MBA program as a graduate teaching assistantship, which meant I was not only gonna get free tuition, they were gonna pay me to come here. I got into TCU's MBA program, graduate teaching assistantship, full ride again, getting paid to go there. And by a fluke, I got into UT Arlington's PhD program in math, and I didn't even apply for it. And got in their graduate business program. When I went through that victim loop and popped out of it and went through the accountability loop, I realized I was gonna have to be the one to know my path and to know everything it was gonna take for me to reach that particular goal. So, and by the way, after I told this to my advisor, she got up and walked out the room. That's the last time I ever saw her. So again, you control your life. You're the one that's gonna be responsible for it, so you need to know everything you need to do to graduate. So it's all about having a roadmap. When I was getting ready to run the Antarctica Marathon, we sailed there from Ushuaia, Argentina for 2 days to get down to Antarctica. The race director called us down to the dining hall, and he proceeded to tell us about this course. Now, there were two interesting things about this. Number one, there were gonna be no aid stations. So we were told we needed to bring 3 bottles of electrolytes with us, not water, because water would freeze too quickly. With the sugar and sodium content and electrolytes, it wasn't gonna freeze as quickly. And since there were gonna be no aid stations, there were also gonna be no restrooms. So I had to train to figure out how much I could drink without going to the restroom for the entire race. So he gave us a race number, 4 pins, and he sent us on our way. And I went to him and I said, I need a map. I need a road map to know exactly where I'm going. So he pulls this hand-drawn map out of his folder, and he starts going through this course in a lot more detail. First of all, we were gonna pass through the research bases for China, Chile, Russia, and Uruguay. We would bring again the 3 water bottles to the start. You put 2 water bottles in the snow, and you carry 1 water bottle with you. As soon as the gun would sound, we'd go through 600 feet of ankle-deep mud. When we got through the mud, we got to this area where these birds called skuas that would try to dive bomb you during the race. So imagine Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. You're running, all these birds are trying to come after you. He said, if you see birds coming after you, you put your hand up in the air. Because birds think the highest point on you is your head. And so if you raise your hand, they'll go after your hand, which has a glove on, instead of your head and face. So if you make it through the birds, keep running. He said, I'll see a flag stuck in the snow. Take a drink out of that first water bottle, put it down in the snow, and keep running. And I'll run over this area where there are rocks about the size of your fist. If you don't twist or break your ankles on the rocks, you get to the foot of Collins Glacier. Collins Glacier is a pure sheet of ice. It's at an 18-degree angle. You go up this, you turn around, and you come back. It's so steep and so slippery, if you slipped and fell, you were gonna knock down all the people behind you just like a dominoes, and all of you are gonna go sliding down to the bottom. And by the way, this was ranked as one of the top 10 toughest marathon courses in the world. So you turn around, go down Collins Glacier, go back over the rocks, take that first water bottle you had in the snow out, take a drink of it, put it back down in the snow, fight the birds off, go back to the mud fields, get back to the starting line, take a second water bottle that you had there out of the snow, take a drink of it, and then you continue running. He said, I'll go through the Russian research base, the Chilean research base. If I see an airplane, I've gone too far. I need to look for a blue building, and that blue building is a Russian Orthodox church. The Pope declared Antarctica Catholic, and just to spite him, the Soviets built a church there that's no bigger than this room. He said, look across the street, I'll see a sign stuck in the snow. Take a drink out of the water bottle, put it down in the snow, and continue running. Cross over a stream, and get to this point where there are fur seals that are waist tall that will chase and try to bite you during the race. Turn around, run back, fight the seals off, take the second water bottle out the snow, take a drink of it, put it back down in the snow, go across the street to the church to pray, make your way back around to the beginning, and do all that a second time. So it was a tough race. And as you know, Antarctica is the only continent where there are no countries. And every time we were in one of those research bases, we were governed by the laws and rules of that country. So therefore, got my passport stamped by 4 countries in one race. So technically speaking, in one race, I ran from China to Chile to Uruguay to Russia. So while we were there, we were pretty fortunate there was a film crew that videotaped some of our experiences. Now at this time, we were having diplomatic problems with the Russians. So, and that's also when we started the race. The research base is called Bellinghausen.
Bags under here. Just make sure you put your life jacket to it. Start line is that little post there with a bunch of signs. Otherwise, do whatever preparation you feel inclined to. But keep yourself warm.
So because we were having diplomatic problems with the Russians, they refused to let us in their building. So we had to change clothes underneath their building in sub-freezing temperatures, leave the clothes there during the race. And then when you finished the race, you had to go back, take off your wet running clothes, and put on ice-cold clothes in order to get back to the ship. One of the things I realized is I could not wear a mask, so I ended up growing a nice thick beard to keep my face warm. If you notice, if you take everything that's man-made out of these pictures, it's like you're looking at a black and white photo. So now this next scene is from the top of Collins Glacier. You can see the swells. We had winds of up to 40 miles an hour. We had some very interesting people, by the way, that were with us that year. This gentleman was trying to be the first person in the world to run a marathon in Antarctica wearing shorts. He didn't make it. You can hear just how windy it is. In this particular scene, you notice the sky turns from blue to white. We got hit with the whiteout during the race. As a 71-year-old lady from Slovakia who did a half marathon there in Antarctica. Yeah, she made it.
Oh.
Yes.
Did you stop?
No, they pulled them off the course. If you looked like you couldn't finish, they pulled you off the course. If you got injured, it was going to cost $15,000 to bring a plane over from Argentina to take you back. So this is one of the seals that was chasing us during the race. This is another one that was going from runner to runner trying to bite us.
What did they do?
Couple of big wins.
Oh my God.
This is William. William is trying to be the first person in the world to finish a marathon in Antarctica in a wheelchair. He didn't make it that year, but he came back the next year and was able to do it. So the entire time while I was out there running, I kept thinking to myself, if a guy in a wheelchair can do this, I have two good legs. What's my excuse? So now we're going to talk about execution. It's important for you to learn and to know how to relax when you are in a very stressful and tough situation. I was in a race in Mesquite where it was called a biathlon. We had a 12-mile bike race followed by a 3-mile run. And I happened to have been in the lead. We got off of our bikes, took out running, and the running route was called an out and back. So you would run a mile and a half out, turn around, and run back. Those are some very tough and challenging courses. Why? Because you get to turn around and you're looking at the person who's trying to run you down and trying to chase you. Now, in Dick Gregory's book, he talked about running and racing strategies. So I was in the lead, hit the turnaround point, and as it was approaching the turnaround point, I tried to gather my breath together, tried to calm down. I turned around, I looked dead at the guy in second place and said, man, it's getting hot out here, isn't it? I was trying to get inside of his head to get him thinking about the heat. The last part of the race, we had to go uphill for about a quarter of a mile. You get to the top, then you go 50 yards downhill. I'm running, this guy is still chasing. And he's looking at me from behind, and he's looking for any possible weakness. He's looking to see if I suddenly start bobbing my head from side to side, if I drop my arms, if my stride changes. He's analyzing me, trying to figure out when he could go in for the kill. We got to the foot of this hill, and I was completely exhausted. I was just spent. But from my training, I knew how to go about relaxing. First thing I do is notice my forehead is getting tight, so I focus on relaxing my forehead. If I'm squinting, open up my eyes, make sure my jaw is loose, make sure my arms are flowing in a really good, smooth pattern. So that's what I focused on. Got to the foot of the hill, immediately focused on relaxing. And by the way, I could hear the guy breathing behind me now. I could hear his footsteps. Got to the top of the hill, went down, crossed the finish line in first place. We were talking after the race, and he said something really interesting. He said, you look so relaxed going up the hill, I realized I couldn't pass you. And I started focusing on the guy in third, making sure he didn't get in front of me. So it's important to know how to relax when you're under pressure. It may be something as simple as just taking a deep breath, but you gotta learn how to do it. As you start executing your plan, you're gonna have saboteurs. There are gonna be people that are gonna try to derail you, that are gonna try to throw you off, and you have to figure out how to go about dealing with that. This was critical for me in 1990 when I was at UT Dallas. We had gone from the general kind of accounting 1 and 2 classes where there may be 200 or 300 students in a lecture hall to the advanced accounting classes where there may only be anywhere from 6 to 12 people in the classes. So first advanced accounting class, we get there, I take my usual seat, front and center. I want to be able to pay attention to everything that's going on. Then the professor starts telling us, it's a tough class. He said all of the advanced accounting classes are really tough. In fact, they're so tough, they have to grade on a curve. And by that, he meant the highest grade in the class, for example, may be a 72. And you can't fail everyone. So he may take 72 subtract from 100, the answer is 28. He'll add 28 points to everyone's grade so that he can give appropriate letter grades. So then a 72 is an A, 63 is an A, all the way down to a 55 may be a B. Now, these classes, by the way, were meeting 1 night a week for about 3 hours, so we had a break an hour and a half into the class. And the professor said, during the break, you need to form study groups. He says, it's impossible to pass this class unless you're in a study group. So when it came time for the break, literally everyone around me turned their backs and formed their study groups. And I went to them and said, hey, can I get in your study group? They said, no, we got all the people already. Went to another group. everyone rejected me for their study group. I want to ask you, what are your options? What do you think would be the options? Just raise your hand. Yes. Talk to the professor. Okay, any others? Yes. Study on your own and hope you survive.
Pray for this.
Pray for the best. Okay? Yeah. Any other? Yes?
Find like an organization in your school that that is like in that field of study.
Okay, so find an organization in the school, like you may have an accounting society or something. Okay, yes?
Maybe create your own study.
Create your own study group, okay. So you all have basically identified all the options that I had kind of come up with initially. But there's one thing about it. I'm highly competitive. I also wanted revenge. There's a saying, throw me to the wolves and I'll come back leading a pack. So I was the only black person in all of my advanced accounting classes, and I realized this was going to be something that I was going to have to deal with in order for me to get my graduate degree. So I realized there was a fifth option: break the curve. This is going to be ruthless. I wanted everyone in the class to fail. So the professor ended up, a couple of weeks later or so, gave us the first exam, graded it, we came back. The professor stood in front of the class and said, "We got a problem. Someone got a 95. Ranked highest grade was 7. That happened in every one of my advanced accounting classes. Bear in mind, I flunked accounting as an undergrad. But I got my act together. I literally forced the entire class to fail. Now, the last point is, when in doubt, stop. I was in a marathon, and for 20 miles, this guy stood. He was right on my shoulder. He was doing what's called drafting. He wanted me to go ahead and kind of break the wind for him. He was going to save energy. When you do this over long distances, you can easily save 3 to 5% of your energy. So his plan of action was to stay right on my shoulder. And as we would get close to the finish line, he would turn around and pass me. So during that 20 miles, I tried doing everything to shake this guy. I would speed up, I would slow down, I would run fast around the corners. I was doing everything I could do to try to shake this guy. Nothing worked. I even ran through aid stations and didn't grab any water. Finally, at 20 miles, we were literally in the middle of the field, and I just came to a complete stop. He didn't have a reason to stop. But for those 20 miles, I was controlling the pace. I knew when I was going to go faster. I knew when I was going to go slow. He didn't know, so he was always having to respond to everything that I was doing. So I stopped. I let him get about 100 yards in front of me before I took off. So I'd been a leader for 20 miles, and he had been chasing me. Now, he was going to know what it was feeling like to be chased. 3 miles later, he was walking. I had worn him out by running a very irregular pace. Now, rule number 1, when you pass someone, you pass them with authority. You just don't barely pass a person. You blow by the person to completely demoralize them, and they think they can't catch you again. So I blew by the guy and ended up getting the trophy. So you're seeing how I'm able to take things that I know from distance running, apply them in accounting, which is completely demoralize people. But that's really not the purpose behind it. But again, it's about dealing with those challenges of executing your plan. You can't let other people get in your way. When the accounting professor, by the way, the way I was able to manage that, they put the answer keys for the textbook in the library. There may be perhaps 30 problems associated with each chapter, and they get progressively harder. So the professor may assign the first 7 or 8 problems. Well, I not only worked the first 7 or 8, I also worked 25, 26, and 27. I was also going after the hardest problems and working those on my own. Again, they got the answer key. Why should I limit myself to the questions that the professor assigned? Why should I stay in a professor's box when I could step outside and learn even more? So, we're at the end. Again, throughout my career, I talked with people who were highly successful. It literally came down to this achievement equation. Setting goals, SMART goals, simple, specific, measurable, achievable, timely. It's about being highly self-motivated. Whenever that negative thought comes into your head, have an M&M to kill it. Setting a good plan. Don't rely on other people to map your plan out. You're responsible. Know exactly what it's going to take for you to graduate. And then being able to overcome those obstacles while you're trying to execute your plan. Bottom line is, you have to ask yourself, do you want to live in other people's boxes? Do you want to live to other people's low expectations? Or do you want to excel? Thank you very much for your time.